welcome, Harvin. And, so folks, we have the President and CEO of Houston Exponential, Harvin Moore, joining us, and he will be walking us through what the Houston startup ecosystem and cybersecurity looks like. And so, and thank you very much. I do want to also plug in that Houston Exponential has been a great friend and supporter of Cyber Houston and Blue Lands, and we actually house one of our locations in the Houston Exponential. And so, and y'all have been so generous in giving us the space in the multi-purpose room for our happy hours that we had to take virtual this year. But I want to thank you all for that, and thank you for all the work that you're doing to encourage innovation in the Houston area. So with that, I want to turn it over to you. Sorry for the disruption, and over to you, Harvin.
Thanks, Umesh, very much. I appreciate the introduction, and also, yeah, to your point, Umesh is one of the the longest standing tenants here at the 410 Pierce building, which has the big Houston Exponential logo that you can see from the Pierce elevated if you are not looking at the car in front of you, which you really should be doing. And I should say that we have a fair amount of additional space. And so just, since you brought it up, if any of you listening are looking for very reasonably priced space, as you know, there are many startup development organizations in town. There are many choices of where you could set up shop, but this is a good place, especially if you have any kinds of concerns about COVID, security, privacy, anything like that, because unlike a lot of the other co-working spaces, this particular building has a lot of all private offices, and it's all on 2 or 3 floors, so it's easily accessed, easy to get to, whatever. Didn't expect to have the opportunity to mention that, but it is something that we do offer. The rates are good, and you can go to houstonexponential.org and click on leasing. Okay, Umesh, so thanks for the softball. That's you may end up with some extra neighbors. Folks, I want to thank you all for your support of the organization and your attendance at the Cyber Summit. I have not attended one of these before, but I've been aware of them and impressed by them. They have always been well-attended events, and a lot of really good information has always been shared at the summits. And I think they have been, I don't remember if they've been here at the building before, but anyway, I have even somewhere in my office a bound book showing photographs from previous events. So thank you all for your involvement. As Umesh said, I will give an overview of kind of the status of Houston's innovation ecosystem. And so cybersecurity is certainly a very important part of the ecosystem, but there's a lot of really exciting stuff going on in Houston. And it's not just because we always say things like that and because speakers always want to say something great about like the status quo. We actually are in very much of a inflection point here in Houston. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit about Houston's ecosystem. And let me see here. Are you all seeing that or?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Okay. Now, as we know much about those of us who are here in Houston, I suppose that's most everyone here. This is truly an amazing place. It is a city where much more than other technology hubs around the United States, where we have a massive economy, which is important, especially in cybersecurity, because of the size of the enterprise clients and the importance of the work that is done for them. And frankly, the safety and security of people all over not just the region, but the United States and the world, because of the importance of the data and the platforms and the companies and the industries that we have here in Houston. So we're the energy capital of the world. And also, of course, as we know, by far the largest medical center in the world. Huge number of manufacturing companies of all kinds. Certainly petrochemicals is something that is the world utterly depends on. But also we have a great deal of other manufacturing and trade and logistics, because we're an intramodal hub for the port, from rail, from highways and so forth. We're located in the center of the country, as you know. And you may have heard the nickname, or maybe not, Houston Headquarters City. America's headquarters city. And that is because Houston has more headquarters of Fortune 500 companies than any other city except for New York. And my guess is that given sort of the last few months, we will probably gain, and maybe New York might lose a few. So it is a very important city. But what's interesting, and the problem set behind why Houston Exponential was created just about 3.5 years ago, is the fact that despite being the 4th largest city in the United States, we had only about the 20th, about the 20th largest technology ecosystem. And this is generally measured. I mean, you can see there's several different rankings there, but venture capital investment is one fairly easy to gather piece of data, which is really important. And when Houston leaders realized, as I say, 3-4 years ago or so, that Houston lagged so much in something that's so important in terms of impact and in terms of economic growth and prosperity and good jobs, they decided that something needed to be done. And so they created an organization called Houston Exponential. So very simply stated, our mission is to accelerate growth and opportunity of Houston's tech innovation ecosystem. We do that, as I said, because the tech innovation ecosystem has companies that have high impact in what they do and high growth opportunities. So as compared with all kinds of other industries or sectors that you could focus on, this particular one has an outsized impact on the economy and on the future. And so this is the area that we focus on. And you can see a little chart there that is we call the HX pie, as in 3.1415926, et cetera, et cetera. And you will see there at the beginning and the middle of the pie is entrepreneurs, because of course, when it comes to innovation, entrepreneurs are what make the world go round. It is the human mind that creates innovation. But it's not just having lots of human minds and lots of creative people around is not actually enough to really change the economy. And so you might realize that Houston, again, always had plenty of entrepreneurs and incredible things have happened here. But without an organized ecosystem, and I will define organized later because this does not mean central planning. We don't do that here in Houston or even Texas. You don't get that kind of growth. So if you look at that little chart, you will see at the very top, 12 o'clock position, startups. So when an entrepreneur gets together with other entrepreneurs and starts a business, then now you have a startup organization. And next to that, in the 11 o'clock position, you'll see SDOs. That means startup development organizations. Startup development organizations are accelerators, incubators, hubs, co-working spots, and so forth. And this is what Houston did not have much of at all until very, very recently. Now, in the building we're in currently, there used to be an organization called the Houston Technology Center, and it was a sizable organization that was founded in about 1998. But it was the only startup development organization of any size in Houston for really forever until about 6 years ago, when the Texas Medical Center began TMCX and then a whole series of other startup development organizations. In the last 6 years, the number of SDOs has skyrocketed, as I'll show you in a minute, to more than 35 startup development organizations now. Startup development organizations create the opportunities for the collisions between innovative people in an environment where there is access to mentorship and curriculum and the office space and other people and institutions and all the other players, which is really what creates innovation. So on the next slide, you will see that in the middle, when you see the little formula there, it's really quite a clever formula. And all it means is that an innovation economy is a combination of factors which need all to be present. In other words, it's not about a silver bullet, which, as you may recall a few years back, the silver bullet idea was, let's get Amazon to open their second headquarters here in Houston. It's a great idea. Unfortunately, Amazon doesn't come places that don't have all the rest of the ducks in the row because they know about this formula. This formula is actually done by Accenture in a report that they did that helped create Houston Exponential. So basically what you have there is you need to have talent So that's of course people being educated in your universities, people in the economy who are there as opportunities, and the ability to attract talent from other parts of the country. You need collisions. You need places where the people can bump into each other and have ideas. They can build businesses together. They can fail. That's very important. They can fail. By being together with other people, you see the opportunity sometimes to fail. You see the opportunity that, you know what, that is a better idea than mine. And so I think I'll join, or I'll quit, or I'll change, or I'll do something else. That's all good. So collisions are important. Finally, resources, of course, that means money. That means other kinds of curriculum and other things that make it possible for a company to grow. And finally, impact. You need to be sure that when you have those things together, they're optimized through collaborations and other factors to make sure that we just make the most of it. And so what does HX do? We try to help those things occur in the city. We don't do them ourselves. We don't operate run any portion of the economy, but we do have a great opportunity to lead kind of as servant leaders, because we can share this mission that we kind of all know we need to work on. So we attract talent and resources to Houston. We connect those factors within Houston, and then we try to help promote both within Houston and outside of Houston what's going on here, because when something is really working, it's important that people know about it. I won't go over this again because I mentioned it. I began to mention it a couple of slides ago. I mentioned the startup development organizations and the startup. Very quickly, as you go around the wheel, the pie, you will see from startups going to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, et cetera. You'll basically see a life cycle of companies. In order for companies to grow, they have to raise money. Usually first it's raised from, angel investors, friends and family, high net worth individuals. That's very important. Now we have an enormous amount of high net worth individuals and wealth in the Houston region, huge amount. It makes most other parts of the world pale in comparison. However, most of that wealth knows a lot about real estate, knows a lot about energy, pretty good amount about medical, but it doesn't really know a lot about tech and cyber. And so one of the things we need to do is recognize there is wealth out there. There are people that are interested in diversification, that are interested in the trends that are going on, which are, of course, quite different in technology as compared with, say, oil and gas. And therefore, there's a lot of opportunity right here in Houston to develop that. That is the early stage growth that's needed for companies to grow in cyber or any other sector. Next, you see venture capital. We have a different strategy there. There is not a great deal of venture capital located or based in Houston. However, there's a huge amount of venture capital based elsewhere. So our formula is simply this: make sure that they know about what's going on in Houston so that they visit frequently and put their capital to work here in Houston to grow our businesses. This is something that did not happen much until extremely recently, but it's a big focus of what Houston Exponential does, as well as many of our SDOs. So together we've made actually a big difference with that, and I'll mention that a little bit later. Finally, you'll see the arrow exits. Obviously, you want to grow a company, and at least your investors want to get out. Now, you might want to do it for your whole life, but your investors want to sell eventually for a profit, and the sale may be to the next segment down at about 5 o'clock. Corporations are important not only, as I mentioned earlier, as customers, enterprise customers, especially, as I say, in cyber, but also they're important for proof of concept. They're important for their own entrepreneurs. We call that entrepreneurship. So there's an arrow back and forth between the corporations and the entrepreneurs, because they generate entrepreneurs, they attract entrepreneurs to the city. And so corporations have many reasons to be an important part of that wheel. And I just want to say that that segment of the wheel is where Houston almost dominates over most any other ecosystem in the nation. So while we're behind in some things for sure, now we're catching up, corporations is one of our great strengths. Academia, of course, is not only our big universities, Rice, University of Houston, TSU, and our community colleges are increasingly important in tech as they begin to provide more skills that we need in tech. I mean, for example, Houston Baptist has an excellent and growing cyber program, for example, but also the research institutions of the medical center, huge institutions. I believe there are 5 institutions, each more than $1 billion a year in revenues or something like that. So very important. Finally, government and media. And the main thing I'll say about government is that, as you know, government in Houston, government in Texas is small. It is underfunded. And so government sort of knows, in a sense, its place. It knows what it can do and what it cannot do. And we, I believe, are very fortunate to have a mayor who understands what city government can do and what it cannot do. And he's provided excellent leadership in helping Houston grow its innovation economy. The next point I want to make that's true of cyber or any other part of the venture economy is that the growth of companies and their life cycle, and you're going to know this about your own company, right? If you're in this business, it's a funnel, which means at the beginning you have lots of entrepreneurs who form companies, and they don't all make it. Lots of ideas don't make it past the first phase of testing or the product market fit or some of the other issues that you have. But then you have to fund the company. And if you don't have the high net worth individual, you end up with a pinch point. Lots of companies get formed, but no one can get funded. So you have to expand access to high net worth capital, and you have to expand the access. I don't know if you can see me here over on the side, but anyway, hopefully you can also expand access to the later stage venture capital, because when you widen the funnel, then making it really big at the top by having more SDOs, more startup development organizations, and more company formation, plus more capital, you will end up with more success stories, more impact, as I mentioned earlier. Just to mention a few of the resources that Houston Exponential offers. We have a number of platforms that can help in several ways. HX TV is just a way that we show many of the interviews, seminars, and events, and so forth that come about that maybe used to be more physical and are now online. Htx Talent is a jobs board, and it's a great size for a jobs board. It's not too small, like just for one little startup development organization or maybe one university, but it's also not too big. It's not monster.com. That's almost too big to deal with. So this is ecosystem wide. And so I suggest, if you have not yet used it, to post your job listings. It's free. It's another service that HX provides as a nonprofit organization, and also you can use it to find a job, because there's quite a I don't know, maybe 1,000 jobs or so listed on that. Next, you see HTX Tech List. May get a chance to talk about this later. Very important. HTX Tech List is one of the only databases of its kind in the United States in which we try to allow growth stage companies to put up high quality listings with very good and reliable data with an enormous number of tags to make it searchable, so that Houston's ecosystem is transparent. And that is extremely important. Not only does it allow a big city like Houston with lots of hubs and spokes, energy corridor and medical center and downtown and Edo and all these other areas, which are just not real tight and close together like you get in, say, Manhattan or Cincinnati, which have these tight little areas, or Boulder. But because of that big city, but by having virtual density, which we get from TechList, we're able to kind of pull it together a little bit more, like a little bit of a smaller and more effective and more dense community with more collisions. Because again, we know collisions is the most important thing regarding innovation. And so this is something you haven't heard much of yet, because it's a brand new product, but we have already more than 500 startups, which is more than a third of the startups and growth stage companies in Houston. And that is very exciting. If your company is not yet listed on HTX Tech List, please go there, and you can either claim your profile if you are listed, it is not completed, or you can apply to add it. Again, it is free. It is not for it's not for service providers, but it is for startups. It's also for investors and tech hubs. Very briefly, the next logo, HX VC Immersions. This is the activity we do to bring venture capitalists from other parts of the United States to Houston, and we show them the number of startups, which is expanding so rapidly here. This has resulted, as I'll show you in a moment, in a huge increase in the amount of venture capital in Houston. And then finally, Deal Board, which is another product that allows you as a startup, when you are raising money, to put that information up. It's not actually literally an offering, of course, because of the securities rules, but we are able to put certain information up for certain stage companies. It's not for everyone, but it is certainly an opportunity for some. I mentioned the success, and I just want you to know that this is not just, a pep talk. This is actually a real smile on my face, because we're just doing great here in Houston because we have so many good partners on this. As you can see from this chart, if you look from 2013 to 2017, you see really not very exciting graph of a slow growth. And something happened, and you see 2018, 2019, it is an inflection point without question. It's an inflection point in, as I said before, the number of startup development organizations. Like I said, we now have 36, of which about half of them were created in the last, 18 to 20 months. And then the startups inside those SDOs, because that's the place where the largest number of startups will begin, is in these kinds of hubs, these accelerators and so forth. And you can see, again, a complete hockey stick in those numbers. And that is very, very exciting. And finally, as I mentioned before, venture capital. The beginning of the funnel is company formation before they raise money. Then they raise money. And so we get to measure it more to find out whether we're succeeding at getting off the mark from where we were lagging the rest of the country. And in fact, we have. Again, as you can see, look at that rather depressing line, up and down and up and down and up and down and nowhere for like 8 years. And suddenly something happened. Again, you can see it begins to take off in about 2018. And it's volatile because deals can be very large and they can change the numbers a great deal. But it's quite obvious from that graph that something happened in about 2018. And I won't say that's when we were formed. It was, but really it's about the fact that so many of the leaders in this economy got together. And I'm talking about the heads of our universities and the head of our Greater Houston Partnership and the biggest corporate leaders and serial startup entrepreneurs and so forth got together on this business plan that we mentioned before, that Accenture worked on, in order to come together and try to find a way to make Houston different. And so you can see a bit more venture capital investment last year. In 2019, it was up 40% over the year before. And this year, despite COVID, we are actually above the venture capital from last year. And there are, in many parts of the country, it's quite a bit down. So it's quite exciting. And then finally, some of the names have been exciting as well. We were very proud of the fact that despite negative headlines for years, at the beginning of this year, we were able to kind of show the world that venture capital really did take off in Houston. And finally, as you all may know, we are particularly proud of the fact that in Houston, we now have a unicorn. And behind me is our little organization mascot, the unicorn. Because the unicorn, of course, means a company of more than $1 billion in value that's not public. And so High Radius, which is a fintech company, managed to do that, which is very exciting. And since then, Preventus Solutions, which is a healthcare related tech company, raised even more money, not quite as high a valuation, but I believe they raised $137 or so million, which is the largest fundraising in 20 years. So really, this is the end. The last two slides are just a point that we want to be sure that people understand, whether you're here, you've always been here and you want to talk to your customers, or whether you're talking to other people about perhaps moving here. It is a very good place to do business. The lack of zoning is actually good when we're talking about a free market, and we definitely have a free market in this area. Great infrastructure, great growth, and then we have a great deal of access to these parties. So I again was asked to give an update about that because it really is, I think, exciting, and it is something that we've seen both in the overall economy of the sort of startup world, but also in cybersecurity. I want to welcome today two people who are going to talk a little bit more specifically about the area of cybersecurity. And in order to be as efficient as possible, I'm going to introduce each with only one sentence, and then they're going to tell you a little bit more about them and what they've been doing here in Houston. So first, I'd like to introduce Amit. And Amit Kulkarni is the founder and CEO of Intruno. Amit.
Thank you, Lauren.
You're welcome.
I founded Intruno as I was going through, I used to run IT security at a large health system in Michigan. And over there, as a security practitioner, I saw the tools that other vendors were deploying and soon realized, how can I do something better, or can I help them? So I tried suggesting to the founders of the company as well as the product managers, but that didn't really go well. So I took it on myself, went to business school at Ross, University of Michigan, focused on entrepreneurship, and started my company as an MBA class project back in 2011. And from there on, we ended up getting 2 patents issued, and we've been through 2 accelerators, one in Chicago and most recently Htx. In fact, we were also part of Houston Technology Center back in 2012, and it's been a fantastic ride. Thank you.
Fantastic. Appreciate that, Amit. Also, we have today Chris Dupont, who runs Galen Data. And so, Chris, a few words about yourself.
And Harvin, thank you for allowing us to be here. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Galen Data. I'm an electrical engineer, but I've done software all my professional life, about a third of it with NASA Aerospace and the 2/3 with Class 3 medical device software. Having the knowledge that most medical devices aren't connected to the internet, and that's a fact today. We were in the business of writing custom medical device software. It's a very unique skill set. A lot of documentation, testing is involved. About 4 years ago, companies were coming to us to build FDA compliant clouds to get their medical device connected. It cost us $500,000 in almost a year, 9 months to a year, to build these one-off custom solutions. And then early stage companies would come to us with very novel technology, and they couldn't afford that $500,000 price. So we saw an opportunity. We live in a connected world. To be competitive in a connected world, medical devices will now have to be connected. And one of the unique things, even with COVID, we're seeing an opportunity now is that it doesn't make sense to, spend 6 hours in a car line to get your nose swabbed and wait 2 weeks to get the results back. And so we're going to see, as horrible as this virus is, we believe we'll see an acceleration for the need, and not just the need, the demand of having medical devices that are connected, and then using advanced analytics to predict health issues and device failures.
And so, as a follow-up to that, so it's not we have cybersecurity issues, of course, anytime anything is connected to the internet. But is there sort of a leading reason or two why medical devices in particular have not been connected?
That is a great question. And medical device companies are very risk adverse. And there's reasons. Back as an engineer, when we were designing capability in our medical devices, we'd want to do a lot of, new features, and regulatory would always kind of throttle us back a little bit, saying, this is good, but you have to consider the regulatory pathway that adds costs and time when we're trying to deliver therapy to the patient. And so, yes, there is risk in anything connected, but I'd like to flip that equation around and say that if you have a child and their EpiPen goes off, or some type of medical device that's measuring a disease or combating a disease, and that device fails, you have a heart pump and there's a bearing failure in it. The patient may have only minutes to live. Wouldn't you want to know that device condition? Think of it as a check engine light. We all have check engine lights in our car, but we don't have a check engine light in a medical device. So when that check engine light goes off, don't you want to know that there's a possibility that there's something wrong with your medical device, or that medical device is not delivering the therapy it wants? So yes, there's risk in connected medical devices, but I think there's far greater risk in not having access to their remote data or health and status of that device, or even being able to predict through advanced analytics, health issues. So yes, I think there is a reason in the past, but we live in a connected world now, and to be competitive, I think most medical devices and all the customers we're seeing now, local and international, are believing that connectivity is the way to go.
Right.
Thanks for that question.
Sure, really interesting. I'm going to ask you actually both a question about Houston as a place to operate your business. Could you both say, maybe Amit, you could begin, why you chose Houston to start your cybersecurity company? Now, I realize sometimes it's because, well, I lived here, but still, if Houston has unique strengths, for example, or if, and also I'd like to know if you could just sort of combine the question, what are Houston's strengths, and what would you say Houston needs to improve on or focus on in order to have more cybersecurity companies start here?
Sure, thank you, Harvin. So let me give a maybe a 10-second pitch in regards to what we do. I failed to mention that in my initial introduction. So Intruno identifies inappropriate access to medical records inside of clinics, large hospitals, medical centers. So it's an insider threat detection system. It's a security incident monitoring system, but for insiders. So having said that, as I mentioned earlier, I used to work at a large health system in Michigan. I had to move to Houston for family reasons, but it so worked out fantastic that Houston also has the largest medical center here. In fact, 90% of the industry is oil and gas, but there is a huge 10%, almost 10%, which is in the healthcare space. And we have dozens of healthcare organizations here in Houston. And after TMCX was formed, that really solidified the connection here. I mean, it was a fantastic relation where they introduced us to CIOs of different health systems here in the metro, and some of them are our customers now. It has been fantastic.
I just want to point out something about TMC, which is pretty exciting. As I mentioned before, TMCX did not exist until its founding, 6 years ago or so. And so when we go over there today and we see, I don't know, something like 200,000 square feet, an entire, as it happens, cookie factory. It's strange, but that's what used to be there before. Completely filled with startups of various sizes, as well as 5 or 6 or maybe 7 different organizations that are different kinds of startup development organizations. That's really early stage itself. In other words, if you think that it's exciting what's already happened in the medical center when it comes to innovation, imagine with the funnel that we talked about, how many more exciting things are going to be happening there in the next 5 years because of how many companies that have been able to develop as a result of all that infrastructure. So I'm guessing that Houston may be a good place because of, perhaps an acceleration in the number of opportunities as a result of the number of startups. I mean, do you both market as well to other startups or mostly enterprise?
So at least for us, we market to enterprise organizations.
Yeah.
Galen addresses all aspects of the market, from the multi-billion international customers, which we have under contract, to the mid-size, to the early startup. We have all different sizes of those type of customers on now connected to the platform. I just saw a question about when a medical device is being monitored, who is monitoring it? In the case of the Galen platform, is we support several different roles. And so the manufacturer can do it, the patient can do it, the physician can do it. That's all configurable. But more importantly, we can automate that process where we can send out alerts to whoever needs to be sent out to: physicians, caregivers, patients, observers. So I think the platform is so configurable that anybody can receive alerts and monitor the data however is best fitted for that device.
Great, and thank you too for the participant who sent the question. As I'm sure you know, those of you all have been watching for a while, you can enter questions, and we'll try to pay attention to what comes across the screen. And I want to be sure to tell Chris and Amit at any time, interrupt and say, "Whoa, let's take that question." Let me ask you a specific question about, right before we do this, a quick question about talent. What's the talent landscape for cyber like in Houston? And then what would you say is the trend?
I'll start with that one, is that Houston, Galen, the genesis of Galen is here in Houston. Most of our talent was homegrown here in Houston, from our chief marketing officer to our chief information security officer to our VP of biz dev to our VP of ops, our verification engineers, our software engineers. I think Houston is greatly underrated for that. We have world-class universities within centers, the Houston Center's core, and within 2 or 3 hours drive. We have the world's largest med center. I think it's crazy that medical technology is developed and born here in Houston, but it has to go out to the coast to grow up. Galen wants to change that. And so Houston also, you mentioned it, Harvin, is that we have great manufacturing capability. The engineering talent is here. And so I think, at least for Galen's point of view, we're just not talking it. We are sourcing all our talent right now locally here in Houston for the most part.
Amit, how about you?
Yeah, so in fact, I have a slightly different view in that aspect. So, I mean, even though the talent is there, because the pay in oil and gas industry is so much, a lot of people do not want to leave that cushion and join a startup with lower pay. And you're sure you can have equity, but it's a much bigger risk than leaving a stable job with fantastic benefits and so on. So it does get hard. I mean, you can get freshers from college, but getting experienced folks, I mean, you have to look. We did have people, and we have lost people as well to bigger, fatter paychecks.
Yeah, and this is something that I think a lot of the industries have found, but I believe they will find less and less, which is to say, it's one thing to find someone who comes with the right degree or the right initial experience, but when what you're looking for is someone who's done a startup before and has done a Series A or a Series B or an exit or whatever, you are likely to find that more in a more developed ecosystem, like the Bay Area or Route 128 in the Boston area in the case of medical. And so that hasn't been as true in Houston. But clearly, the longer we're around and the more exits we have, and they are rolling in, we're going to have more of that. So I imagine you're hopeful about that. Now let's look at funding. Everyone needs funding to grow a business. Amit, as you launched and built Intruno, I don't believe you heavily relied on outside investment capital to scale the business. And maybe tell us how you decided not. And by the way, there's a question that came up, and we're trying to get it to pop again, so we'll answer it. It just wasn't up long enough, but we will answer it, please. In any case, tell us how you came to the decision not to use your. Actually, okay. You know what? So that we don't forget, we have a question from Sujit Shah. Who'd like to grab that about collaborations with Austin? Do you have anything in particular?
Yeah, so my son actually just graduated from UT. Austin is great. I mean, there's a lot of the funding sources that I'm talking to right now are in Austin. We hire biomedical engineers from Austin and A&M, if that's okay to say, and the University of Houston. But there's obviously things going on in Austin. There's more technology. From my perspective, there's more software activity going on in the entrepreneurial space. But that's something we can tap into. And so, yes, Austin is a great resource for us. And being a software company, we can be actually located physically in Houston or within Austin too. But eventually, Galen will most likely open up an office in Austin at some point in time.
One of the great things about the innovation economy is that it is a growing pie. It's a growing pie worldwide for humanity and for the United States and for Texas. Austin, yeah, we compete with Austin. Okay, we compete with Dallas, we compete with Nashville, Indianapolis, and everywhere else. But at the same time, Austin is a fraction of the Bay Area. I mean, I can't remember, but it's a fraction of the Bay Area. So when stuff moves to Texas and they choose Austin instead of Houston, it didn't bother me at all. Austin's a great place. I like to visit. And ultimately, this helps Texas as a whole. And like I said, I mean, it really helps growth in anywhere really helps everyone. So I don't get too worried about that. But again, back to funding. So tell us about how you funded your business, and then we'd like to ask Chris a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So thank you for that question. So in fact, we started out, as I mentioned, we have been through a few accelerators. So HealthBox out of Chicago was our first accelerator. So they invested a small amount, but they brought on some early customers who were actual investors as LPs in that fund. So it was not only just money, but this was really smart money from real customers. So that helped us get off the bat right away. And then additionally, we did raise a small angel round in 2016. And then so we have been relying on customer revenue, and we've been growing with that. Well, definitely we are open to additional investment. It will help with the sales and marketing, but it's not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like non-dilutive investment, and customer money, actual customers is a fantastic way to raise your business, as well as now in some of these fields there are grants available as well, which are non-dilutive. Now, Chris, in your hand though, Galen Data has actually gotten, I think, a few rounds of investment from various sources. And what do you think about the fundraising landscape in Houston, you sort of past and present?
It's always hard to raise money for a startup, especially a technology startup in an oil and gas town. And Houston, though, I had some early success talking to some oil and gas people, but one angel investor said, Chris, I don't understand software, so I'm not comfortable investing in it. But in the end, we kept trying, and Houston actually came through. We found several angels. Most of our angels are right here in Houston. On top of that, the Texas Halo Fund, the first fund that vetted Galen, invested. They made introductions into the Houston Angel Network, which invested in Galen. So I have to give a shout out to both Han and the Halo Fund. And it's important that and this is one mistake I made as an entrepreneur, is I focused on the engineering, the clinical, the regulatory, building the technology. What I failed to do was build a relationship with the financial community. I'm doing that now. And the financial community and the investment community is very, very strong here in Houston. So I encourage all the entrepreneurs out there to reach out to, just hang out at TMCX, J Labs, the Canon, Station Houston. You'll eventually cross paths. And the sooner you do that, the sooner you start building relationships. We say there's no dots it's a line, and the sooner you can start building relationships with everybody in the financial community, it's just a good thing. It builds a relationship. So that's a great question.
So here's a question concerning the development of your client base. Certainly on cybersecurity decisions are about minimizing risk, but in the early development stages, how does a startup in this field without a proven track record sort of de-risk its solution to a potential large client? Would one of you like to take that?
Sure. So as I mentioned, so we got lucky in that aspect that we had customers who were investors in us. So they had some stake, a skin in the game, essentially. So even, I mean, not necessarily all of those investors became our customers. Some of them were like, okay, this is purely investment. We are not going to go and deploy your software. This is great stuff. In fact, an organization here in Houston, their CIO openly said, what you're doing is fantastic. This is back almost 5-6 years ago. He said, this is fantastic what you're doing. I don't want to deploy your software because your stuff will catch things that I don't want to deal with. So it was an eye opener. So anyway, but to answer your question, yeah, I mean, definitely helps to have these customers. Key aspect is to go in, do those pilots, suggest that, hey, we are willing to, whether you internally take a bank loan or whatever is needed, or get an angel investor if you can, if you're lucky. But get those pilots, talk to as many possible organizations as you can. Don't just rely on one big giant customer. I mean, for us now, unfortunately, the sales cycles are really long. It can range anywhere from a year to 3 years. And for a startup, or when you're even early stage, it's even harder. You need to have the right connections. So put more irons in the fire. Don't just rely on a few. I mean, they might be good connections, but still, the more the better. And don't just look at Houston. I mean, there is some affinity for being local, but it's not necessarily there. I mean, Houston healthcare, unfortunately, is very few percentage of the organizations here are willing to take the risk with startups. Most are fairly conservative, I'd say that.
Yeah. Chris, what about you? What advice would you have about how building, clients, or early stage when you don't yet have a big track record?
Just do it. Get out there. It's a grind. In our case, we've been doing this for a long time, and people were paying us a service revenue to build these custom one-off FDA compliant clouds. And so we knew there was a business opportunity there, and we turned that into a product. But it's not easy. But in our case, we had the deep expertise. There was no discovery. We weren't inventing some new algorithm or having to prove some new clinical therapy. We took 30 years of medical device experience, poured it into a platform, but it's still hard. Getting that first customer, and you have to make compromise. You have to work, but just keep at it and get that first customer. And in our case, we were able to land the first handful of customers based on our expertise, but they still took a risk on us, and we're very, grateful for that. But it's hard. But my best advice is get out there, start doing it. It's going to be hard. You will fail, but eventually you'll knock through and have a success.
Okay, so 3 more questions, and the first is going to apply really to both of you guys. And we see a lot of reports basically suggesting or telling us what I suppose we already know, which is that healthcare lags in some sense behind other industries relating to cybersecurity. But both of your companies are focused on cybersecurity in the healthcare area. Why do you think, briefly, it's been deficient despite the extremely confidential information and the potential life or death severity of the breach?
Sure. Chris, it's okay. I'll go first. So healthcare, so HIPAA was passed more than 2 decades ago. But the challenge with HIPAA and the follow-on, the ARA, High-Tech Act, the Omnibus of 2013, and so on, all these have added additional teeth to HIPAA. But it's still not as prescriptive as PCI DSS, which is for financial industry. That's essentially where the gray area is. I mean, there are other organizations which have tried to fill in the gap. For example, there's one entity called High Trust, and so on. So people or organizations are trying to adopt that, which is a hybrid between NIST and HIPAA. and obviously covering more closer to PCI rather than HIPAA. But that's one of the main factors, and the fines are coming in. I mean, in the last 5-6 years, OCR, Office of Civil Rights, has been enforcing these fines, the breaches. Every single every single incident, now there is a fine of almost $55,000, and it keeps on incrementing. There are organizations who have paid, even here in Houston, they paid high millions of $4 to $5 million in fines. And that's when they start suddenly realizing, oh, this is serious. I mean, we really need to take care of our patient data, security and privacy. And that's really when, again, products like ours, which identify data breaches and intrusions internally as well as externally, then we are starting to get more and more traction. So it's a matter of regulation and people understanding that clinical data is equally or even more valuable than just a credit card information.
Now, Chris, my next question is actually about what you guys both think is the next big trend. So you can either handle that last question or you can move right to what do you think the big trend is?
Take the new one. Yeah, give me the trend.
I thought so. Okay. So what do you think? Yeah. So what do you think the next big trend is then in cyber?
So, well, obviously, I go back to my opening thesis is that most medical devices, in my case, aren't connected. We saw a material change about 4 years ago, and now with COVID and everybody being remote, I think that the industry will demand, not just want, will demand that medical devices will be connected, access to remote data, doing predictive health, being able to predict, that cancerous lesion, that health issue with medical device. I think that is the trend, and Galen is all in. We're betting everything we have on that will be the trend for us, for sure. And cybersecurity is obviously key to everything we do. So we're very, very sensitive on cybersecurity, and we do everything we can to ensure the best practices of cybersecurity on the entire platform.
Well, not being an expert on cybersecurity myself at all, I can just tell you that every time I talk to somebody that knows a lot more than me, they say, well, however scared you are not scared enough.
Right.
Amit, what do you think? Next big trend in cyber?
I believe with most organizations asking their employees to not only work from home now, but even possibly in future, the endpoints security and how these endpoints or laptops or desktops are connecting to the work environment, the extension. Previously, it was all you have to go in your office; it's all secure. But now, the way the perimeter, the digital perimeter is expanding so dramatically. Additionally, and I believe Umesh mentioned it in the previous group about if you are not allowed to, if your organization gets a ransom, you should not pay that ransom. I mean, if you get a ransomware attack and your systems are compromised, you should not pay that ransom, or else you could be in liability and there could be other fines for you. Having said that, the endpoint as well as the other, besides the perimeter security aspects are there, but now the endpoints are the weakest link. You need to focus on the weakest links. This is more of a generic issue, and the most recent issue which every organization is now facing. It should be encrypt our laptops. That needs to be done, but at the same time, how slow can the machine become? You put on 4, 5, 6 different agents on it, right? So what is the cost of doing good work at the same time staying secure? So that's a pertinent issue at hand right now.
Okay, good. So we're going to watch for additional questions, but the final one I have for you all may be the most important one of all, which is what advice would you have to a potential founder looking to start a cybersecurity company in Houston? Or I think you could alternatively, talk about a relatively new founder who has a cybersecurity company in Houston and wants to grow it, maybe pivot or something. What's some top advice you'd give, Chris?
Yeah, I think one, just do it. It's scary starting a company, but build the expertise. Specific to cybersecurity, build as much technical expertise you can. but also build relationships with the other parts of the industry, such as marketing and the financial community. Obviously, cybersecurity is going to be more and more important to everything we do moving forward. And so the deeper skills you can get in that area, but don't neglect all the other skills you need to run your business. That's one of the mistakes I made. So the more skills you have, the more rounded, the more relationships you make with Houston Exponential, I think will definitely put you in a position of strength.
Fantastic. Amit?
Sure. Great question. So for any founder or any startup to be formed, I mean, you need to understand the market. I mean, don't just start something because I want to do something. That's great, but you need to know what your competition is. So I started a company, even though there was a huge, another competing company which owned probably like 95% of the market. Now they are down to almost 50 to 60%. But at the same time, look at your competition, try to understand. I mean, you may not know all your competitors. You know, if someone does not use an analytics tool and they're using Excel, that is also your competitor. So understand what are the different variables. And having said that, I mean, definitely tapping into resources is great. But one mistake which I have done, and it's probably my training, I'm a technologist, and I like to keep on engineering stuff, make it better and better and better. And even though I learned during my MBA, we had a simulation class, and my team came in third, where we had the best R&D team, but we didn't win the competition. Why? Because we didn't have as many number of sales reps or marketing folks. So you may have the best product, but if the customer doesn't know that, hey, these products are out there, I mean, you're going to fail. There is a balancing act in regards to, where do you spend your dollars and your time, right?
Well, this really, this has been a great conversation, very helpful. We've seen a lot of great questions. Thank you to the audience for your questions. There have been a lot of nice compliments as well. Chris and Amit, thank you very, very much for your participation in the panel. And I would like to hand it back to Umesh, maybe to introduce our next moderator.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Stay on for a minute, guys. Thank you, Harvin. Thank you, Chris. Good to see you, Amit. It's been a while. Good to see you back. And you guys talked a lot about setting up and moving things forward and the new work. I was reminded as I was listening to you that 35 years ago when I was setting up my business, we were thinking about setting up a brick and mortar business, and it was all about information. It was called Management Information Systems at that time. Then it became data security. Then it became information security. Then it became compliance automation. And now we're into cybersecurity and compliance and privacy. That landscape has changed over 35 years. And we were thinking about building a lifetime business. I think that role has also changed. And I think it's important for, the investment community has matured. There's money coming in. Now the whole perception is about get in, grow a company, and consolidate. So I think you're going to see a large consolidation effort here coming through too. So, but it's been wonderful working with you and HX, and thank you for putting this panel on. It's been great, and thanks for all you're doing to bring awareness in the innovation space and bringing capital to Houston. So thank you, Harvin.